The views, information, or opinions expressed during this recording are solely those of the individuals involved and do not necessarily represent those of Alberta Health Services and its employees.
This is Long COVID, the Pandemic After the Pandemic, an Alberta Health Services webinar and podcast series. Long COVID is now being recognized as a new chronic condition that is becoming better understood across the globe. We aim to support our healthcare providers and caregivers to find and use appropriate resources for themselves, their patients, and clients. We'll share stories from patients and providers and explore the innovative work being done in Alberta, across Canada, and globally to support long COVID. This series will help raise awareness of all the work that's being done to understand and address this complex puzzle. Thank you for joining us on this first webinar in a series of 4 initial shows. We'll be separating out the video into a podcast format so that we can support information sharing across a broader audience. I'm your host, Shawna Curry. On today's episode, we're going to talk about the patient experience and what it really means to have long COVID. We have 3 brave women who will share their personal experiences with long COVID. In future shows, we'll have discussions with other patients and healthcare providers from a variety of backgrounds and experiences to get a better understanding of how we can best support this new chronic condition. Let's dive in. COVID-19 does not discriminate. It can affect anyone of any age, any gender, race, or health status. Originally, especially early on in COVID, it was thought that if you caught COVID-19, that you were doing something wrong. Perhaps you were participating in risky behavior, which now we know is absolutely not the case. But unfortunately, this false belief has created a significant amount of shame and even stigma attached to having COVID-19. It's created barriers for people seeking care and for eligibility for support by employers. Unfortunately, some people still don't even believe that COVID-19 is a real virus and therefore don't believe that long COVID even exists. So today we have a panel of 3 amazing panelists who come from very different backgrounds that are struggling with long COVID. We're going to hear from each of our panel members about their experiences with COVID-19 and their current struggles with long COVID. We hope that by sharing their stories, we can start to humanize long COVID, to put a face to this new chronic condition that has over 200 possible symptoms. Our panel highlights the spectrum of long COVID symptoms from mild to significant impacts and how the timing of when they got COVID may have significantly impacted their trajectory. So on today's show, our first guest is Melanie McDonald. Melanie is a 37-year-old born and raised Calgarian. Welcome to the Unicorn Club. I am one of the few as well. She's a married mom of 2. She works full-time as a senior communicator at the University of Calgary, and she's super familiar with COVID research. In her spare time, Melanie has helped her husband run a successful small business and had a side art business and played ringette. These are all things now that are really difficult with long COVID. Melanie was diagnosed with COVID-19 in December 2021 and is here to share a synopsis of her experiences from then until now. Melanie, in 3 minutes or less, can you tell us what your health trajectory with COVID-19 was and long COVID has been up until now?
Sure. As you mentioned, I got COVID-19 in December, and I'm not sure where I got it. We were really careful. We didn't go out a lot. I was double vaccinated at the time, and it was probably a week before Christmas, and I was just trying to celebrate with friends and some coworkers, and I got an extra gift out of the Christmas holidays. I was tested for Omicron, which came back positive, but I had more Delta symptoms. So AHS said it could have been the Deltacron variant potentially. But since then, I have not had taste or smell. Sometimes I get it back, maybe like 5 or 10%, but it's usually like really weird. So that hasn't been ideal, but the hardest part has been lack of energy and just overall exhaustion and a bit of brain fog. I used to be incredibly active. My husband and I both work full-time and run essentially a full-time business. And I find by the end of the day, if I have to keep working into the night, I usually need a power nap before I could muster up any energy to make it through. probably until about January. I even needed a midday nap just to like feel like I could recharge. But the hardest part has just been not feeling myself, not feeling like I'm getting my energy back, and the negative consequences associated with that.
Thanks for sharing, Melanie. And we're going to hear that same type of sentiment echoed through this presentation. So we're going to dive more into that once we go through each of our panelists. Our second guest today is Velvet Dawn Silver. Velvet Dawn is a 50-year-old entrepreneur and businesswoman. She runs her own business doing workshops, meditations, course certifications, and healing sessions, and so much more. I don't even have enough time to go into all of the things that Velvet Dawn does. She used to work in the medical field, and she is quite health savvy and highly in tune with her body. Velvet Dawn tested positive on April 7th, 2021, and has been supported for long COVID at the Peter Lougheed Center, and as well as a part of the University of Calgary genetics study. So off to you, Velvet, in 3 minutes or less. Can you tell us about being diagnosed with COVID-19 and your health trajectory with long COVID?
Yes, thank you, Shawna. So for me, it was at the very beginning. I was not vaxxed. It was, back in April, and it was all very new. And I didn't even really know that, I hadn't been in the health field for a while. And so when I got it on the 7th, I knew that I had it. My chest was really heavy. It just felt unlike anything I'd ever had before in my life. I'm a very active person. I love my brain. And so I was in the hospital, and I refused to come home with oxygen because I'm an Aries and I'm stubborn. And I was going to get through this. And I promised the doctor I'd go back if I had to. But what I have been struggling with and still struggle is, Melanie, you talked about having a nap. Is I found that before I would do my workshops, or when I was planning it, I had to do a nap in between the workshops. I had to have an hour and a half in my lunch so that I could have a nap in order to even function. The other thing that I really struggle with is insomnia, laying awake at night. And my brain is just wired open, and they've tried many different things to help me with that. And I specialize in meditation and energy work. So it's been really a struggle for me. Physically, my body is back to where it should be. My lungs are very happy and healthy. And it's just my brain that I'm working on now. The brain fog is and my memory. I failed the memory test with flying colors the other day when I saw the brain doctor. So I really struggle with that, being an author and trying to find the words to articulate, which can lead to depression, right? Because you just are not the same person that you used to be. And people look at you and they think that you're happy and you're healthy because you look healthy from the outside, but inside it's not at all that way. So that's my story. I continue to look for new ways, and I'm happy to be part of spreading the awareness for other people to realize the long haul effects. So thank you for doing this, Shawna.
Oh, you're welcome. We're thrilled to have you as a guest. So again, we're going to dive into more of the questions about your stories after. Our third guest on our show today is Susie Golding, who's joining us from Ontario today. Susie tested positive for COVID-19 on March 21st, 2020. And as in her words, is the week of the lockdowns and toilet paper hoarding, which, there's a little bit of humor in that, but not a ton, because it's affected her health so much. She had COVID-19 before testing and immunizations were widely available. Susie has devoted a tremendous amount of her time, and I just can't even give you enough thanks for all the work that you've done in terms of supporting long COVID. You're the founder of several online support groups for people who are struggling with symptoms of long COVID. You've been a part of 18 studies helping scientists and researchers learn more about long COVID, and Susie is currently involved with the PACER program. So Susie, I bet you have a sense of what I'm going to ask you next in 3 minutes or less, if you could share your story about COVID and long COVID.
Well, as you mentioned, I fell ill in the first wave in March of 2020. Didn't really understand or know that I had COVID at the time because I didn't have any of the telltale symptoms. I didn't have any respiratory issues at all. And I didn't have any fever. I hadn't traveled. So I really didn't fit the criteria of someone who'd had COVID. I was having very unusual symptoms. So I did know that something was off. And that was sort of in the acute stages. The acute stages lasted for up to, I think it was 10 weeks, where I was having sort of ear, nose, throat issues, deep ear pain, thought that I had some sinus issues, was on some courses of antibiotics to deal with the issues of an ear infection, which didn't touch that. But then I had issues with swallowing. It felt like my had a lot of inflammation at the back of my head when I woke up one day, had difficulty swallowing, felt like my throat was paralyzed. And then I had the issues kept evolving and sort of moving around my body, where I started having issues of gastrointestinal issues, where I had, sort of flu-like symptoms, and then all the issues of gas, symptoms of GERD, which I've been diagnosed with since. And then it sort of traveled through into my heart and having erratic heartbeats. And at one point I thought I was having cardiac arrest, going into cardiac arrest. So these were the acute stages. And then after the acute stages, it went into the long COVID. And the long COVID is when the fatigue hit, like a brick wall. It was so debilitating. I could barely move. It was hard to function. I mainly just stayed on a couch or rested through it. I just was trying to listen to my body and knew that I had to, just conserve my energy. As well as that came the brain fog, which was really debilitating, was one of my, to this day, the worst symptoms that I've had to deal with, the cognitive dysfunction. I still to this day can't swallow properly. I often lose my voice. I'm starting to, the more that I speak, the more that my voice gets sort of hoarse. And I also have a lot of issues. It's hard to say in 3 minutes, but I did have issues with walking, with my balance, with reading. I was really lucky to, in my travels through all the work that I was doing, to meet up with physiotherapists, and I was able to have access to a recovery program that was an interdisciplinary program that I had that really helped me with my sight targeting that was off, my gait ataxia, that I was literally falling over as I walked. I really had to be careful going up and down stairs. But I think the main thing is that long COVID is an invisible disease. It's episodic in nature. So you can have some good days, you can have some bad days. But it really affects you, financially, it affects you emotionally. Your emotions all over the place, as one of the other guests said, there's a lot of insomnia and not sleeping, mood changes, irritability. Just it seems nothing is going right. And a lot of other things can happen simultaneously. Shingles is very common within our community, and all sorts of other things, hearing issues and skin issues, rashes. I had a rash on my body for quite some months. It's a very uncomfortable thing to go through. And to this day, I think that I believe that I have sustained brain damage. And it's very difficult for me to, if I don't get enough sleep, just to speak and to really find words. So I'm suffering from dysphagia and some other things. So, I've had to change my course in career. I am no longer able to do the physically challenging work that I did as a florist. And I sort of had to reinvent myself. I'm now a medic in the film industry. It's a cushy job that I have, but not everyone is as lucky as I am. And many people are still bedridden. So my experience with COVID has been that it's been 2 years of hell. But so many people are much, much worse off than I am.
So long COVID has made a significant impact on the ability to function at the same capacity as someone did before their COVID-19 diagnosis. So long COVID, we know, doesn't just affect your physical abilities. And I think each of our guests touched on this briefly, is that it takes a toll mentally. So my question for each of you is, what is the greatest impact that long COVID has had on you mentally or emotionally? And we'll start with Velva Dawn.
Okay. So mentally is the depression, right? I'm finding, like the ladies were saying, there was a point when I was really, really sick in the hospital, and the doctor came in and he said, do you need to call your family? Like, I don't know that you're going to make it. And that has stuck with me, because what I started to realize is life is short, right? And I've made drastic changes because of that moment in my life, that the things that I was waiting on my bucket list they're coming, right? That's why I'm going to Hawaii on Saturday. I'm not waiting anymore to live my life, because mentally and emotionally, it was like lightning. It was like, here you are. I had no idea that I might not survive and make it through it and see my 3 girls, grow up. So it changed my life. So depression is definitely one of them. And just frustration with the fatigue, right? So it's right there, and it does affect you financially too, because you can't do the job that you were doing before. So you do have to shapeshift, and you have to be creative in other ways, because there is not that financial support out there for the long haulers.
And Velva, John, on an offline conversation that we had kind of talked about some previous conditions. And so we had kind of talked about how COVID-19 is different to recover from than other conditions. Can you talk briefly about what you had mentioned in terms of it being very much harder to recover from than even a PE?
Yes. So in 2016, I thought I was having a heart attack. I was going through a separation, very stressful point in my life. And I spent a week in CCU. They finally figured out that I had a pulmonary emboli in my right lower lobe. So it took a while when I came out of CCU to trust my heart, to trust my body, right? Because the pain that I'd felt during the heart attack was unlike anything I'd ever felt. So it took time to regain that physical strength back. But what was so different with this has been a lot more difficult to recover from, which I know you would think, why? Just because, people are familiar with the diagnosis of a pulmonary embolism and a heart attack, and they know how to treat that. This is something new, where we're learning together as a community and the healthcare providers, how do we deal with these symptoms? They are real things. So this has been by far a lot harder to recover than being in CCU, even though I was in isolation for 45 days with COVID. It's been incredibly hard because it's not a quick fix. It's not like you recover instantly, and the resources are there. They're working on the resources, but they're not there. And even my own family doctor has had trouble trying to diagnose some of my symptoms. So by far, Shawna, this is one of the hardest things that I've had to recover from so far.
Thanks for sharing that. I should have warned everybody to get your Kleenex boxes out so they're on standby in case you need them. It's really hard to hear these stories, and yet at the same time, so important that we hear how much long COVID is affecting people, because that's how we create change, and that's how we figure out what we need to do to support patients just like you guys. So Melanie, what's been the hardest thing for you mentally or emotionally?
I would say some of the similar things. Frustration when you hear people say, like, we should all just get COVID and it's just a virus. And I feel like that's probably true for people that maybe don't have as severe symptoms and don't have long-term impacts. It's really easy to say, it's just like a cold, just get it and you'll be fine. But I feel like a very different person than I even was early December when I didn't have COVID. I don't feel like I have the energy levels. I'm having to make choices between, do I do something with my family today, or do I do my errands, because I know I can't do both. I don't have the energy. I'm a communicator by profession, and I agree. Sometimes you just can't find the words, like that brain fog is there, and you're like, man, why is it so hard to talk right now and just to think of the things? And I think it's just another side effect. And hearing the other ladies talk about all of the different side effects that they have, I'm sitting here, I'm like, man, I have that too. And I have that too. You don't even really think maybe that's an outcome of COVID, but I did not experience it before. And it's frustrating to hear some people act so casually about it and say, we don't need any mandates and it's time to just get back to regular life. And I understand why that is important, but at the same time, when you are suffering from long-term effects where there's very little resources or support to help you, it's hard to just be like, yeah, let's open up and put everybody at risk when not everybody has this experience to build off of. And then just the mental health aspect of, when am I going to feel like myself again? And for me, not having taste or smell, I've actually gained an embarrassing amount of weight since I got COVID, because I used to be very regimented in my diet, and I used to meal plan and prepare all of my food. And because everything tastes the same, smells the same, I accidentally ate something spoiled once. Like, you just are going for convenience because it's all bland and all the same. And so that takes a toll on your mental health too, just in terms of making the right choices going forward. I play ringette, and I have not been able to play ringette since I got COVID because I just don't have the energy. We're an adult league. We play late at night. It's a miracle when I make it to 4 p.m., let alone 9 or 10 p.m. at night. And so I'm just not exercising the same way I used to. I used to ride the Peloton at least 3 or 4 times a week. I have not gone on it a single time since I got COVID. I just don't have energy for anything extra than survival and what I absolutely have to get done in a day. So those effects on your mental health and the frustrations of just what you see going on in the community, and it weighs on you for sure when you are one of the ones who has longer term effects.
Thanks for sharing that, Melanie. And you brought up so many key points in terms of how each piece of our life is so interconnected, and that, we talk about mental health, but then you talked about how, it's affected your diet, how it's affected your weight, how it's affected your ability to exercise. And we can't just segment out and be like, this is mental health and this is nutrition and this is exercise. They're all intertwined. It's this giant spider web where if we pull on one end, the other end wiggles. And so they are super connected. Susie, what about you in terms of what are the biggest effects for you mentally or emotionally?
Well, I think one of the isolation, the great loss, and the lack of support. The loss is hard to deal with, like the other panelists have said, weight gain is very common. Just being at a place where you just don't even know how to begin to get better, like where to start, what can you do, what's safe, what's not safe. And then just, kind of giving up hope because nobody seems to know. And so weight gain is very common. I've gained a lot of weight myself. And losing that old person, that self of who you once were. I'm a single mom. I used to be very busy and to an active 13-year-old boy. Was on the ski patrol and, rode a racing bike on a road bike. And did many things and became a very inactive person. And, that has a lot of big play on your mental health, and trying to, reach out to people who just don't understand what's going on. This being an invisible illness, people seem to take it for granted and think that, well, she looks okay. Oh, you must be doing well. The common thing that people say to you is, hey, you must be doing much better. You look great. And it's like, well, that's not really what's going on. I'm having a good day, but it's almost it ends up being very dismissive. Another thing is that, I didn't really get a lot of support from my GP, who's been my GP for 30 years, interestingly enough. And, I don't blame her. But what I know is that she just didn't have any information, and she still doesn't have any information to understand and recognize the symptoms of long haul COVID. Because I think that if she knew what long haul COVID was, she would certainly understand that to this date, I still don't have like a clinical diagnosis from her. One day she says, oh, we think you may have had some kind of virus. And then the next appointment she says, well, we can't really say you've ever had COVID. So it's just, it really, really plays on you to be dismissed by your medical practitioner when you're coming to help. And, you have to really try and advocate for your own health, just to try and prove that you've actually have this disease. It's really, really disheartening and can really play on your emotional strength. So that, and just, the loss of the mom that I used to be and the work that I used to be passionate about. And now I'm doing something else and finding, doors to open that from the doors that have been closed from this. And then, the lack of support within even the family is very critical. Family and friends just don't understand what's going on. So there's very not a lot of support where people really, understand what you're going through, the symptoms that you're suffering from. And So it just really ends up playing on your emotional state of mind. And that has a big impact on you over the long run. I've been dealing with that for 2 years now. And it's just, it takes a lot of energy out of you to deal with that being dismissed. So the dismissive thoughts from people that care about you and want to help you, maybe don't even understand that they are being dismissive, but it's a lot to take. And so I think those are the ones.
Thanks, Susie. That was almost a wonderful intro to our next question. In terms of COVID, this is a new thing. It's not like any of us as healthcare professionals went to school and studied, what do we do in COVID or what do we do with long COVID? This is a new thing. So everyone across the world is learning, how do we treat COVID? How do we treat long COVID? What's working? And so, we're learning from what other people are doing and sharing studies and resources. But at the end of the day, this is still a relatively new condition. We don't have really well-established clinical protocols in terms of what to do and what we know works or doesn't work. So as healthcare professionals, we really like to reflect on the things that we're doing well. And when you look at COVID as a whole, there's so many successes that we need to celebrate during this global pandemic. And healthcare has made leaps and bounds in terms of how we've responded to COVID much quicker than we have been able to react to other conditions, because it's like, okay, we've got this global emergency, we're going to drop the current protocols and processes. Let's make things happen. And we should be really proud of this effort, as well as the effort that's been put in from every single healthcare worker. So for all of you that are on the call, I have to give a heartfelt thank you to all of the work that you do. Now, that being said, it's much harder to dig into what's not working. So I'm going to ask some tough questions to our panelists in terms of that. And I'm going to ask the question of, how has the healthcare system failed you? And so I'm not looking for specific, this healthcare practitioner did this to me, but just in that broader context in terms of, how can we do better? What do you wish that healthcare providers knew, or what advice would you give to healthcare providers? And so we're going to start with Melanie on this one.
So my family doctor was actually really great while I had COVID. She called right before AHS did to let me know what at that point I already knew, as I was isolating in my room by myself, feeling like this really sucks. And I was starting to get quite sick. And she called to check in on me. And a few days later, the rest of my family came down with COVID as well. We tried our best to keep it isolated, but she called again, which I was like, wow, like that's nice that my family doctor is checking in on us. But then I never heard from her again. And I just feel like when you were actively infected with COVID, like obviously, most people don't feel great and you sort of have that expectation. But I almost feel like having a check-in now would be even better. And I have talked to my doctor about some of these longer symptoms that I have, and it's more, hopefully with time, those will go away. Like there's not really a solution. There's not really access to resources that I'm being connected to, to, I guess, help me figure out what I need to do next. But I'm actually probably more critical of the government than I am of the healthcare system. As an example, because we all got COVID, we decided in February, like we're going to travel. We haven't done anything in 2 years. So we went to Hawaii. And we had gone to our doctor's office and had our PCR tests printed off so we could bring those with us while we traveled, as well as notes saying we've all recovered from COVID. And on our way home, we got stopped at the airport and they said we needed to test. And we explained the situation. We showed all the paperwork saying that we could, come back positive because we've had it within the last couple months. And they ended up having to bring a public health expert in to review everything and make sure we weren't lying and interrogate us at the airport. But they said to us, the federal government will probably follow up with you after this. And not even joking, we got home February 25th, and the federal government still calls us on a regular basis to harass us about our trip. And that even though even my children were double vaxxed, my husband and I were triple vaxxed, we all recovered from COVID. They were harassing us about whether or not we had done the right thing. And they have made us submit all of our paperwork. I can't even tell you how many times, maybe half a dozen times. And I think a complaint overall is not only are healthcare resources for long-term COVID difficult to come by, but when you feel like you do everything right and everything you were asked to do and you were supposed to do, they still make it really hard for you. So I just feel like instead of the federal government spending money, having people phone us and harass us for the same stuff we've submitted many times, why don't they pour those tax dollars into support for patients with long-term COVID symptoms, or make it easier for patients to access resources? So anyway, I'm probably more critical of the government than I am of the healthcare system.
Thanks for sharing, Melanie. Off to you, Susie.
Okay, so I was just trying to remember that I had something to add on to what you said, and I just forgot it. So I'm going to say that I think it's really important for the medical community to understand that I feel like the onus of, with Omicron and with the different variants and not having testing readily available, that the onus is going to fall on many of the GPs first level to be able to recognize and diagnose long COVID. So recognize the symptoms. I think it's really important for everyone to be versed, to have the latest information, to at least understand that there are over 200 symptoms. I feel like sometimes, and don't get me wrong, my GP has been my GP for 30 years and she's fantastic. She's very quick and she's efficient. Her appointments are usually 5 to 10 minutes. But when we're dealing with people who have long COVID, at one point I counted 35 symptoms. So, sometimes we may need to take a little bit more of your office time. So when someone's calling with different symptoms, then maybe schedule a longer time for an appointment. Also, it's very difficult when you're not healthy and you're especially suffering from brain fog to be able to take on advocating and figuring out your next line, through the care paths and what needs to be done. There's the most effective recovery programs that are out there are interdisciplinary. And so we need guidance to get us to these programs. And if the programs are full, like many of them are now, we need guidance to where to go to see specialists and advocate for us to get in quickly and efficiently. Also, there's many syndromes and illnesses that are are caused from long COVID, such as POTS, postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, mast cell activation, and MECFS, myalgic encephalomyelitis chronic fatigue syndrome. And so we need to familiarize, people need to be familiarized with these terms and the illnesses that are happening from long COVID, and who are the supportive specialists in your area, and how can these people get to these specialists. So there's just a really big amount of pressure that's going to be on the doctors that to be up on the latest information, to give us time to just recognize and acknowledge and meet us with kindness and believe that we don't want to be sick. And these 35 symptoms, we're not hallucinating these symptoms. These are happening. We're finding that a lot of the tests that are done, the blood tests and many of the imaging tests, they don't show any of the issues that we're having. So, it's easy to say, well, the tests are all fine. And this, I don't know what to say, but it just, it needs to be greeted with softness and with, I'm losing my words now. So I'm just trying to say, please just be gentle with people. We know that you're busy and you're going to have to be seeing the numbers of patients that I can't even imagine what's going on with all that's happening, but there are so many people with long COVID, and we just need to be respected and treated with compassion.
Thanks for sharing
Thank you.
that, Susie. I love what you said about we don't want to be sick. And long COVID is not a choice. Is that, people aren't saying, hey, I'll take long COVID over here. Give me some of that. And you had said something in a conversation we had earlier is that, in the early days that people were afraid of us. And that's so telling is that, COVID and long COVID is such a new thing that we're like, oh my God, there's this thing called COVID and what do we do with it? And so, we do need to change that perspective as we learn more is, how do we humanize long COVID? How do we treat you as a whole? So Velva, we'll throw that question back to you now and get your thoughts in terms of, where can we do better? And what do you wish that healthcare providers knew, or, what advice would you give to healthcare providers?
I really like what Susie had said about compassion, right? We don't want to be sick. We don't want to have these symptoms anymore. And there's shame. Like I feel shame associated with my brain, right? Because I was always very intellectual. And, even for me to go to my doctor and say, like, my memory is really bad. Like I need help. Like this isn't working. And, I think I'm being followed by 6 specialists right now, from my cardiologist to, internal medicine, to my family GP, to a respiratory doctor. Like collaboration is key, right? Because I'm always, when I see my cardiologist, he said to me, Velvedon, you should be coagulated. Why are you not coagulated? And I'm like, okay, we need to get together, right? Because one of the other major symptoms I have is bruising since COVID. I ripped a Band-Aid off and I have bruising all over the place and nobody can figure it out what is going on. So I would say collaboration of all of the modalities and the disciplines together, so that there's an overall plan of wholeness for the patients, which would be really amazing. And I know everyone's just learning about it, but I find I'm the one having to give the information to each of my doctors, rather than there being a way for them to connect, just because they're all trying to figure it out, right? And my doctor's amazing. If she doesn't know, she refers me. Like I've known her, I used to work with her. So we've known each other for 20 some years. So I'm grateful to have that. But I would just say collaboration and compassion are key, because we're already feeling the shame and we're feeling, there's a lot going on, so it'd be nice just to have that compassion back sometimes.
Thank
And
you
I
for
just want to
sharing that.
say,
Yeah, go ahead,
I just
Melanie.
wanted to quickly jump in and say, even, in terms of employers, like I work at the University of Calgary. We have so many teams working on COVID research. I feel like I work in an environment where it probably is safe to talk about these things. However, I don't, because you feel that sense of shame and you don't want to keep saying like, man, I still feel crappy from when I had COVID 4 months ago. Like you do want to see the light at the end of the tunnel and you pretend it's there, even if it's not, because you feel like people are probably just sick and tired of hearing you say anything about it. So you just try and move on, even if you're not feeling okay.
I just wanted to say something too. As far as there's a lot of virtual care that's being offered, and that's wonderful. And so we're off to a great start with that. But I find that what's not being offered is any community level support systems, like meals for people who can't cook for themselves, laundry service, or grocery shopping, or supportive things like that. Also, there's no financial aid, or so any kind of programs that can promote community level support that the doctors, that GPs know of, start to find these things out and know where to turn people to, and really try to facilitate what's available.
Those are all such great points. And I really want to highlight the 3 women that we have on our panel today are extremely high functioning women. These are career driven women who had, really great careers. You've got families, you were participating in sports and other activities. Like all 3 of you were really highly engaged before you had COVID. And then you've also been very savvy in terms of navigating the healthcare system. So to highlight the fact that, the three of you have said these challenges and struggles in terms of navigating, and, you're highly educated, you know how to use a computer, you know how to navigate the system, and there's still these gaps and challenges. And so just to bring attention to that. So that being said, when you're in the thick of it, when you're dealing with a chronic condition that's day in, day out, and for some of you, Susie especially, this has been going on for years, that it's really easy to get overwhelmed and to feel helpless, or to get depressed, or feel like really down on yourself. So to flip that coin, I'm going to say, what's been the silver lining in getting long COVID? Is there a gem for you in terms of a lesson that you've learned, or something that's popped out? Is there a glimmer of goodness that's come with it? And we'll start with Susie on this one.
Well, so much has happened in the last 2 years, but I think the most important thing is the focus that I've been able to have has been very healing with all of the work that I've been doing. I run the COVID Long Hauler Support Group Canada, which is Canada's largest network of support groups. We have support groups for all the different provinces, one for Alberta, as well as really getting involved has really helped me, I believe, function at a higher level and really help my brain recover. So that's been really important. So I guess that's been the silver lining in all this, is that I've been able to somehow harness and tap into something that I feel is important and makes me feel, what's the word I'm looking for? Makes me feel appreciated, makes me feel worthy.
Thank you for sharing.
And also just being able to be involved in science and trying to help the researchers and, recruiting for them, and just really being an advocate and having that platform to really be able to share and have a voice is very healing as well. Thank you. That's
great. And if you haven't heard about it already, the Facebook group that Susie has created is a wonderful place to start in terms of feeling like you're part of a community. We'll share. We'll have Velvet Dawn go next. What's been your silver lining? What have you gotten out of this as a gem?
I just want to quickly say thank you to Susie, because that Facebook group made me realize that I wasn't losing my mind. So thank you to you, because there's so much valuable knowledge on there. So for me, it is my priorities. I felt like I was in a hamster wheel before, and I was just working to live. And at that moment when the doctor said, "Who do you want me to call? I don't know if you're going to turn this around. I don't understand what's happening to you." My dad is not a man who prays. He's a farmer, and he literally lit a candle and he prayed for me every day. This is an emotional part for me to talk about. But the people that were really in my court, my dad came and he cooked meals for me. If you know a farmer from back in a small town, the last thing that man did was cook. And he came and he cooked for me. He helped me change my sheets. He filled up my humidifier. He did so much for me. And I saw a part of my dad that I had not seen growing up, which warmed my heart. And the community. Like, I was very fortunate living in Okotoks, small community. There was food dropped at my door constantly. People coming for medication, whatever I needed. So the silver lining for me was #YOLO is my theme. Life is short. Do it now. Don't wait. So I changed my life. The people that surround my life, I have little tolerance for negative energy or drama. It's just not my jam, because we have enough things going on. And just the support, right? Just seeing the world open up and seeing that a lot of people did have compassion and they did break open that during this cycle. So many silver linings for me. Thank you.
Velvet Dawn, I love your dad already. He sounds like a wonderful person. I just want to give him a big hug for stepping up and helping out there. Melanie, what's been your silver lining?
I would probably agree with a lot of those things. Just having a really amazing support system. Like, my husband has been really fantastic. I'm grateful to have him. If there's a day where I just don't have energy to get some things done, he really takes the lead and helps me out. And he's also a very busy individual, so I really appreciate that. But man, I just want to taste and smell again. So I'm still like waiting for some silver linings. But yeah, I think just having a really great support system and feeling like they're there for you has been really nice. But I haven't been in as long as these two ladies have, but hopefully I start to see some improvement soon and feel like there's more silver linings there for me.
Make sure you rest and more rest.
Exactly. We're hearing that a lot. All right, we're going to change things up a little bit. We're going to go to some questions in the webinar. So I think Nicole has been popping in the chat box. If you have any questions that are specific to the experience for our panelists, if you want to pop those into the chat box, and she's sending those my way. But we're going to start with a question from Michael. In terms of have any of your panelists experienced tinnitus, particularly with loss of taste and smell? And so this has been linked, according to the message, linked, WHO said, linked to some vaccines, potentially Pfizer and Janssen. But just curious on the experience from the three of you, or what you've heard from others. I know, Melanie, you're still really lacking that taste and smell. So maybe we'll start with you on this one.
Sure. During my COVID symptoms, while I had it, I felt like my hearing was very fuzzy. And I just kept thinking, like, this is insane that it like takes your senses away, but I can't say I've had any hearing issues since.
Susie, you probably have some experience in this with your groups, especially.
Yeah, a lot of people suffer from tinnitus. That's a very common symptom. I've had tinnitus for 2 years now. I found that acupuncture, I had 12, no, almost 15 sessions, and it was really effective for the treatment of tinnitus. I do still get it. It's not as bad as it first was, but especially if I overdo myself, if I'm working too much, if I do too much physical activity, then the tinnitus will come back with a vengeance. There are ways to treat it. To live with it is with the background noise, and there's apps that you can have on your phone. So if I'm falling asleep at night and the tinnitus is really loud, sometimes I find if I move a certain way, it kind of diminishes it a bit, but there's lots of phone apps that you can, with the sound of the rain or different sounds that will block that out. But tinnitus is very annoying, and a lot of people do suffer with that.
All right. Another question is, what would you say to someone who has just been diagnosed with long COVID? And I'll just let any of you come off in order. Go ahead, Susie.
Rest, and more rest. Yeah, that's the most important thing. I feel that perhaps maybe I wouldn't have become a long hauler had I rested through the acute stages. So the first 10 weeks, although the issues that I was having were very peculiar, and I wasn't having shortness of breath. So I'm the workhorse that I am, always working through my illnesses. And so I was outside gardening and doing things and really, trying to open the house for the spring, get ready for the summer, lugging things around, bags of dirt. And I think that could have possibly pushed me over the edge to make me really ill. So I don't know if that's true, but that's how I feel. And I just feel that it's really important for seeing what I see in the group that I run, because I'm in there. I've been watching people's posts for 2 years, 10 hours a day. I understand that people do too much, which causes them to relapse. So people start feeling better. They want to catch up on the things that they have fallen behind on, and they go for it. And then that puts them into this tailspin where a lot of symptoms come on, new symptoms start to evolve, and it's just a 9 steps forward to 2 steps forward, 9 steps back scenario where it just causes more damage than anything. So I think rest is key, and it's the healthy eating, a healthy diet, and lots of rest.
Dawn or Melanie, do you have any other thoughts that Susie didn't cover in that?
I would also say, don't be afraid to keep asking questions about your symptoms, right? I wish I would have asked more questions. Like my pain is out of control with my headaches. The codeine, the Tylenol codeine isn't cutting it. So I would say keep asking questions to the medical professionals if you're not getting answers or you find your symptoms are not being controlled.
I think join the support group too. We have so much information. It's a very supportive community. People really share what's worked for them, what hasn't worked, and you get a lot of information. All the most important, all the studies and media, everything that we've done. It's all there. It's all collected in one place. So it's a really good resource to have.
Melanie, any final thoughts on that question?
Yeah, I mean, just learning from these ladies, maybe advocate for yourself some more. I think I'm doing what I was told to do and just wait for symptoms to go away. And, with time, you'll feel better. And I can say it's not really happening, especially at the rate I would like it to. So maybe I need to be pushing harder with my healthcare provider, which is frustrating. It's tough that we have to push so hard to advocate for ourselves. It's too bad the system isn't set up in a way that just has those supports a little bit more easily accessible. But maybe that's a learning that I have to take away from today as well.
Thank you. And we've had so many great questions that have popped up in the chat box. Unfortunately, we're not going to have time to get to all of those. Some of them are actually really great questions that we're going to address in our next episode. So in line with what we were just talking about, there's a website, AHS, so Alberta Health Services, ahs.ca/healthy after COVID. And that is the central resource hub for all things long COVID. So in terms of everything that Susie and Velvet Dawn and Melanie just talked about, to advocate for yourself, there are some resources on there that can help you to navigate symptom-specific concerns. And pacing is one of them that we hear all the time. So, go low, go slow, take your time, rest, don't overdo it. Really important that you don't push too hard through long COVID symptoms, because that can definitely be a flare and cause things to take longer to heal. You're going to do better if you just take a slower progression through everything versus push really hard, and then you have to take a giant step back and take longer to recover. So thank you to everyone who's joined our webinar today. This wraps up our show. A huge thank you to our guests, to Melanie, to Velvet Dawn, and to Susie for joining us and for being really vulnerable in sharing your stories. I give all three of you a huge applause. I wish I could give you a hug over the internet here. By learning about how long COVID affects everyone differently, we're able to learn how to best support these differences. So thank you again to everyone for joining us and for listening in. We hope that you'll take this information and share it with your colleagues, with your friends. If you work with patients, that you'll share some of these resources that we talked about. Our next episode is going to be on April 28th from 12 to 1 p.m. again over lunchtime. So until then, stay safe, and thanks again for joining us.
Together, we do amazing things every day.